Thank you all for coming today. We're going to get started. I'm charged with welcoming everyone to the 18th Annual Lloyd E. Powell Enhancement of Police and Community Trust Forum. And I thank you for coming and showing up in force. I was able to speak to Mr. Powell last week, and he was very happy that this is continuing. And I'm sure that you all send his thoughts, and he's sending his thoughts to you. When Brian, Mackie, and I got together to talk about what we would cover today, we both were struck. It was right after Charlottesville, and we were both disturbed and struck with the events that happened there. And we thought it was really important to have that conversation in our community to see whether or not, if something like Charlottesville could happen here, and if we are ready and prepared to handle it, to make sure law enforcement is supported and understands the community's perspective, and the community understands the law enforcement perspective. And so it was suggested that we kind of get a videotape to talk about kind of the rising, the change in atmosphere. There's always been hate groups, but there certainly has been a change in the atmosphere. And so we have a short video that kind of talks about hate groups, kind of sets the and sets the scene for our discussion, talks about hate groups, and talk about why there is this rise and why it's happening. But before we do that, because I'm not following the agenda, I'm going to turn this over to Steve Hiller, who's representing the prosecutor's office.
Hey everybody, can you hear me without the microphone? Okay, we'll do it that way. Mr. Mackie had planned to be here, but there was a family situation that arose this morning, and he regrets he's not able to be here, but he does send his regards and his appreciation for all of you to show up. And he asked me also to express his appreciation to Lloyd Powell, who had the vision to start this event 20 years ago? 20 years ago. Because Mr. Powell values good law enforcement, and he's always been an advocate for that. And he knew how important these kinds of discussions could be in fostering good relations and providing law enforcement with important tools to do an effective job for the communities that we serve. And so let's just take a moment to give Lloyd a round of applause. It's also my pleasant responsibility to introduce some of the people in the audience who are here, some of our dignitaries. We'll start with Ann Arbor Police Chief Jim Baird. Eastern Michigan University Police Chief Robert Heighes. Ypsilanti Police Chief Tony DeGiusti. Chelsea Police Chief Ed Toth. First Lieutenant Joel Allen of the Michigan State Police. Ann Arbor City Attorney Stephen Postema. Representing the sheriff is Commander Marlene Radzik. And is the Chief Deputy here as well? Is he still here, or is he stuck off to his other meeting? Chief Deputy Greg Bozick was here, and he had another meeting. Chief Larry Rinnick of the Saline Police Department. William Hampton, the president of the Ann Arbor NAACP, and also the president-elect of the Ann Arbor Kiwanis Club, which is a club near and dear to my heart. And finally, Ann Prout, the deputy director of the Michigan Advocacy Project. With that, I will turn it back over to Delphia.
gonna play the video. There are scenes that are kind of disturbing, but I think that's kind of the atmosphere we're living in. So. I hope you keep this video in mind. It kind of sets the scene of kind of the atmosphere in the country. And so,
use the mic, please. Thank you.
So it kind of sets the tone of it, the atmosphere in the country and where we find ourselves in Washtenaw County. So at this point, I'm giving the very difficult task to help all of us kind of digest that information and hear from our panelists, to Professor Ronald Woods. And briefly, I just want to give a background for those who don't know Professor Woods. He's a real treasure to Washtenaw County. He served he was the first head of the Department of African American Studies at EMU and was recently the interim department head. He now serves as the chair of the EMU Commission on Diversity and Inclusion. And one thing that was close to my heart, he started his legal career at Legal Services in Ohio. So I would like to present to you Professor Ronald Woods.
Thank you, Delphia. And indeed, as I'm talking, if our panelists would come on up and just take a seat. I want to thank you very much, and I want to say a word about our panelists as they are coming up. In the order that they will be coming to you, and for some of them this may be new to them, but we're going to begin with Attorney John Shea. Many of you will know him. He is an attorney in private practice here in here in southeastern Michigan, and is coming to us in his capacity with the ACLU, and he is part of their Washtenaw County's Lawyers Committee that helps them in their work. Very well known, very widely respected. The next person that you will hear this afternoon is Mr. Desmond Robinson, who is to my immediate left. Desmond is a student at Eastern Michigan University. He is a native of Alabama, but most of his life has been here in Michigan, and he comes from the Downriver area. Desmond has been honored during our annual Martin Luther King Day as a student humanitarian, and currently serves on the President's Commission on Diversity and Inclusion, and was the leader last year of a silent protest that was commemorated yet again this year with a march about a week and a half ago. Our next speaker will be Chief Bob Heighes. Bob Heighes is the Chief of Police at the Eastern Michigan University, his Department of Public Safety. Bob's career with Eastern is one that spans 4 decades. He has come through the ranks and is in that leadership position now, and we thank him for the leadership that he has given. And then lastly, Ms. Leslie Stambaugh, in her role currently as the chair of the Ann Arbor Commission on Human Rights. And Leslie also is a consultant, has been engaged in this work for some time now, and after a few framing remarks here, we will hear from each of them in the way that they will around the work that they do and presenting things that will help us give some a point of entry into this very important topic. This important topic of speech, free speech, protest, this issue of the ascendancy of white hate groups, and particularly how we as communities, be it a civic community as a county or a city, be it a university community, how we can be proactive in planning how we will engage this very, what we often talk about in the field of law, this very delicate balance of where speech collides. What do you do? What do you do to keep people safe? What do you do to create a safe and open space for dialogue? And again, as seen through the events of Charlottesville, These things happen to sort of bring so many issues involved. Issues of speech, issues of our history, issues of matters that are unresolved, and issues of competing visions about who we are. As you came in, and perhaps also at the table, there are a couple of items that you will see that we've given you. These particularly pertain to the university setting, but they have to do with what One-Tall calls the new wave of student activism. And as you're able to look at that, it simply points this out, that activism on our campuses is on the rise and will be there for the foreseeable future. How do we create within our universities, and of course, you can never stop a university within the boundaries of that university, within our cities, how do we create the safe space? This goes on, and in fact, if you sort of merge that with the other article on how to manage universities in a time of turmoil, there's a set of things that emerge. They talk about, number one, the fact that activism will be there. Number two, the importance of creating open channels of communication. And I know some of our respondents will begin to talk about that. And they talk about the need for us to be proactive. We cannot wait till an event erupts on campus, but we must have a process that has been vetted through a campus community to talk about what do we do, who do we notify, how do we communicate with student groups, how do we do this so that we can have that vigorous marketplace of ideas, but also do so in a way that keeps us safe and that moves the needle of progress forward. So I'm going to ask if each of the panelists then will begin to, will start to come with us, or to us, and we'll just ask if we'll all talk into the mic. We are being taped and we want to have that. So Attorney Shea.
Thank you, thank you. It is a challenging time for civil libertarians because we are seeing what appears to be, to many of us, the abuse of those civil liberties in the guise of hate groups and hate speech. When you read about or view recordings of events like Charlottesville, it causes us many times to question our commitment to free speech, free press, freedom to assemble. The ACLU has had many people ask, why is it that we tolerate this kind of speech? Why is this protected speech? And I want to give what I believe the ACLU's perspective is on that. The answer isn't because it's just words. The answer isn't because words don't hurt. Words aren't harmful. The fact of the matter is words do hurt. Words can cause harm. Hate speech is corrosive in our society on many levels. It is harmful, and it's not so simple as to say, well, you know, sticks and stones can break my bones, but you know, words will never hurt me. It's not true. Words can hurt. They hurt psychologically. They can incite people to violence and cause property destruction and personal destruction. So that's not the reason why the ACLU continues to wave the flag for free speech. We continue to do so because in our history we've seen the alternative is more oppressive than tolerating harmful, hurtful speech in the present moment. Historically, when we've allowed government to control what people can say and publish and what they can assemble for, then what has happened is the majority has used that to keep down minority viewpoints, whether it's African American viewpoints or whether it's union organizers or whether it's communists and socialists. That's what we have seen. If you look at, I just wrote a few things down, you think about King's March on Selma. where the government attacked that march with dogs and water cannons. You think about Kent State. You think about the protesters that were violently broken up by the Chicago government during 1968's National Convention. You think about McCarthyism and the persecution of communists and socialists and union organizers. You think about even in the early part of the 20th century, post-World War I, where we had government clamped down hard in conjunction with private capital interests on unions and union sympathizers. And just in case you think old white guys can't do it to old white guys, go back to the Alien and Sedition Act in 1798, where the Federalist Party passed a series of acts, one of which was the Sedition Act, which said it shall be an imprisonable offense if you publish false, scandalous, or malicious things about the government. That was their attempt to control the Republican Party there. Back then, politics was only populated by old white guys. So it cuts across all races, all cultures. The point is, where we allow government to make the rules about what we can think and what we can say and what we can publish and what we can gather together to petition our government about, it tends to inure to the benefit of the majorities and the establishments and not to the benefits of everybody else. So that's why the ACLU says we don't like hate speech any more than anybody else does, but we don't want to see the government try to regulate what is and what is not hate speech. Now, having said that, not all hate speech is in fact speech. Not all hate speech is protected. If you're marching through a neighborhood in the middle of the night with flaming torches and you're armed and you're wearing a sheet, that is a march that is not intended to provide any message than one of threats and intimidation and attempts to cow a population. That's not free speech. That's not First Amendment protected activity. Hate speech, which is intended to incite to violence, or reasonably should be expected to incite to violence, is not protected speech. So there are limits on what we permit and what we don't permit. And I think the challenge for all of us, and in particular for law enforcement, because they're the ones who are on the front lines of trying to enforce everybody's civil liberties, is distinguishing between the two. When is it that what we're protecting is in fact constitutionally protected activity, and when is it not? And how is it that we step in and we try to draw effective lines in between the two, so that we're able to, continue this still an experiment in democracy. We're still a pretty young country when you compare us to civilizations over time. But we face challenges in every generation, and this is ours right now.
Thank you, Attorney Shea. And now, Desmond Robinson, Eastern Michigan student.
Hello, everyone. How'd that video make you feel? I am so angry. I am so nervous. To think about where our country is going makes me very nervous, but at the same time, it inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing. So, I want to give you something real fast. So, on Valentine's Day, I had a very interesting Valentine's Day. I made all the international and Muslim students my Valentines. When the No Ban, No Wall protest was happening, when Donald Trump wanted to ban the 9 countries, remember that? He still wants to do it, but you remember? A lot of our Muslim international students, they felt alone, that they weren't welcome, that they weren't loved. So I went to the international student office and I spoke with one of the workers there. I said, let's put an event on for them, so know that they are loved and appreciated. And what I did, I had a whole room rented out for them. I got a bunch of eagles. We call each other eagles at ACLU. I got a bunch of eagles to make valentines for them, to make affirmations for them. We put them all over the table. The table was full. And then I also went around and I videotaped different eagles talking about how much they supported our international and Muslim students. And when I showed them the video, the international students and the Muslim students, they were so appreciative. Some girl was crying. She was like, I'm so happy that you did this. I really, really needed this because I was so afraid. And that's the kind of initiative and unity and love that we need right now. And that's the kind of love that I push out. So I use that same initiative to invite DPS to the anniversary of the silent protest against racism that I did on campus. And the Black Lives Matter movement specifically targets police brutality. And I believe that you cannot have a discussion about police brutality without talking to the police. They have to be at the table to talk about it so they can understand where they can improve and how we can come together. So in the beginning of the march, I said that. And I was so amazed because a lot of the Black Eagles there, they started applauding to that. And in the media, they want to demonize or make the Black Lives Matter movement look so evil when it's really not. All we're saying is our lives matter, and we want to be protected and secure like every other citizen has the right to be. And in the middle of the march, I asked all of the Black participants of the march, I said, if you're Black, come here. And it's funny because one person didn't come over. I'm like, hey, you're Black, come over here, come over. I'm talking to you, get over here. And I asked them, I told them I love you, we're in this together. And I said, now turn around and look at all your allies. We had white people out there, we had international students out there. And then I went over to Lieutenant Diana and I stood next to her, and you will notice, and I said, and you will notice that some of your allies are officers. And immediately, I saw so many smiles on my Black people's faces. It made me so happy because for some reason, people think that Black Lives Matter is about anti-police, and it's not. It's about anti-police brutality. And I think every officer who's a good officer is definitely against police brutality. And that makes me happy because that's what they represented at the march. So I'm happy you guys came to that. And one thing I wanted to say after watching that, because that video had me a little shook and still. Education is key. We all need to know how to protest. We all need to know our rights when we protest because obviously they are so organized. What they're doing is very smart. They want to attack in the community level. They want to run for offices in the Board of Educations. That means that we have a white supremacist making educational change in how our kids are learning. And that's not good. I don't want our kids to learn through these lenses. I want them to learn through a unified and loving and open-minded lens. And if we allow that to happen, then we're making our kids suffer, even in the beginning. So that means that we have to be educated and politically, we have to be political participants. Just now, yesterday, I got so excited, I signed a petition to end gerrymandering in Michigan. I was like, you want a petition to end gerrymandering? Let's do it. Let's do it. I signed that. I was so happy. I made a video about it because it takes that, enthusiasm and that participation to make a difference. And I want to inspire my fellow young people to get involved in that. And I want to inspire my elders to encourage us and to give us your wisdom. Because after a while, I just lost my grandfather in April. We're going to lose our elders who were around when MLK was alive. We're going to lose that wisdom. And some people don't like reading anymore. We're going to lose that. I think it's very important for us to unify and to make unexpected unity. To make allies that we wouldn't expect to be allied with. I'm talking, I want Black people fighting with gay people. I want us to be together. I want Muslims and Christians standing side by side. We have to fight with love, and that's the best way to get rid of hate. And that's what I'm all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Chief Robert Heighes.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. I appreciate the comments by Desmond. They're right on. We appreciate Desmond on our campus. He's very active, very supportive, and brings us along and engages in conversation with our department on a regular basis. We couldn't be more prouder of Desmond and his efforts on our campus. And John, I appreciate the acknowledgement of the challenges that law enforcement faces as far as it relates to free speech and protests, because it is a challenging a topic for us. As I told Dr. Woods the other day, law enforcement are at these events, but we're there to provide safety for the people who are participating in the protest. It doesn't necessarily mean that law enforcement supports some of the people that are what the protest is about. But we have a duty, and the duty is to provide for safety for everyone involved, both on each side of the issue that we may be trying to deal with. And there's a second piece of that challenge is when we do have these race incidents that happen in our campus or in the city, we have a responsibility to try and solve them. And we work just as hard as any other person in trying to resolve these crimes. I know on our own campus we had some major graffiti incidents written on our buildings, and we have spent over the last year and a couple of months trying to solve who committed those crimes on our campus, because they are crimes. And the university does take it very serious to the fact that we offered up a $10,000 reward. But we are getting closer to solving those particular crimes on our campus. Like I said, we've been working on it for over a year, and we continue to move forward on that. But again, the challenges with a protest, communication is so important between the police and the groups that are leading the protest, because we want to do the right thing, and we want to know what we're dealing with and how we can make both the protest safe for everyone that's attending these events. So the better the communication, the better response we can have. Open dialogue is so important. As Desmond mentioned, we have reached out to student groups on our campus to try and communicate this message here. We met with our student government, talked about efforts to make sure that we are all on the same page, that we don't have incidents that go sideways. We want people to know that we're here to protect you. And we're involved with our community. I mentioned to Dr. Woods, I've been in law enforcement now for 40 years. I've been at EMU for just over 33. I'm an EMU grad. My family was raised at EMU. When those incidents happened on our campus, I took that personally. I truly did. It was hurtful. I've said this many times over, that those messages do not reflect our campus. And I don't believe they reflect our community overall. And it was troubling to me. And that's why I say we've been working steadily on trying to solve those incidents that have happened on our campus. But it is challenging, very challenging, and at times it's very frustrating because, as Desmond said, we're trying to do the right thing. Majority of us are trying to do the right thing and solve these incidents. I'm proud to be a law enforcement officer. I wouldn't be here 40 years later and still be doing the job, getting up every morning, coming to work. I enjoy my job. But they are challenging times. And every generation faces these type of challenging times. And hopefully through communication with our community, we can move together and move forward together with this challenges. So we need your help. You need our help. So I appreciate these opportunities to come out and speak as such as we are today.
Thank you. Let me tell you a little bit about the Human Rights Commission in Ann Arbor. We are a small group. We have 9 people who are appointed by the mayor for 3-year terms. We don't get paid. The Human Rights Commission in one form or another, and in a number of forms, has been active in Ann Arbor for at least since 1954, and maybe earlier than that. That's the earliest I found. However, I don't think people know very much about it. The Human Rights Commission, I think, its biggest achievement in history has probably been the non-discrimination ordinance that they passed in 1972 and revised in 1978. It was about the one of the first in the country, maybe the first in the country. And it does spell out rights for citizens of and residents of the city of Ann Arbor, and did so, I think, before the state law actually passed. Thank you for nodding. And until recently, the present Human Rights Commission's greatest achievement happened in October of 2014, when we passed a well-deserved, well-needed update to that non-discrimination ordinance. And that update allowed somebody, us, to actually take complaints so that we put some teeth into that non-discrimination ordinance as well. And we thought we were going to sort of rest on those laurels. That sounded really good. But there was a disturbance in the force a month before. On August 9th of 2014, Michael Brown was shot and killed by Ferguson police in Missouri. And although that probably wasn't that different from things that had happened for years, a lot of people finally took notice. And they started to wonder, is it just Ferguson or is it elsewhere? What's going on? What about our town? And then, a month after we passed the non-discrimination. Can you still hear me?
No.
Try it again? No.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay, I can talk without it.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
Please raise your hand or something if you can. Probably be more comfortable. On November 9th, 2014, Ann Arbor got a heads up. Ora Rosser was shot and killed by a police officer. And people started, who hadn't thought about it before, started to wonder, is Ann Arbor like Ferguson? What's happening? What's going on? And people started coming to the human rights meetings and asking and demanding that we do something about it. We were a group who was interested in individual rights. We have a lot on our plate. We didn't know exactly what to do with it, but as more and more people came, we realized and asked, we realized we were probably the best group to look into the shooting, not that shooting, but look into the police and see, is this something that is a problem with the police, or is this something that we need to know? How are our police doing? Are we really in Ferguson, or is this something very different? We mobilized. We formed a subcommittee, and the subcommittee did a lot of public interviews, public forums, talked to a lot of people, did a lot of research. We were fortunate, we're in Ann Arbor, we had law students, a group of law students who wanted to do this as a directed study project and asked if they could participate, and we welcomed them. And we did some things on our own as well. In May, we got a report from the subcommittee that was headed by Dwight Wilson of our commission, and we learned a lot. We got a report also in May from the law students, and that helped. Suddenly, we're starting to learn a lot about police-community relationships and what works and what doesn't. We started finding out what was going on elsewhere, what solutions other cities had done. And that was also put into this puzzle. On November 4th of 2015, we submitted our report to City Council. We did not find major problems with the police, but we found things we thought could be handled better. and there's always things that could be handled better. We thought community relations could change. We wanted to look further, and we wanted more community involvement in policing. People seem to want more. So we made 3 recommendations. First, that we hire somebody who is a police consultant who had been saw a lot of different police forces and knew what to look for, had access to police records that we didn't have when we were doing all of our research, to do an assessment. And that group or individual, we wanted to have somebody who also knew what police review looked like, or community police engagement, what that looked like when it worked. Our first recommendation. Our second recommendation is that we had some kind of a body, we increased police community relationships in some way. Review, probably, some kind of a board. We didn't really know, even though we had done a great deal of investigation into what other organizations had done. One of the things we found out was very few things really work well. There are lots of ideas about what a good oversight board would look like, for example. But in reality, when you call them and you talk to them, there aren't that many that work very well. And so we know we needed help. Finally, we recommended that they do some things. They adopt some practices like alternative dispute resolution in some cases, like more community engagement that they had. Task forces, etc. So we had some of those kinds of recommendations as well. And finally, we said we wanted to keep involved because whereas we started out with very little expertise in police oversight, we were getting better. A lot of things happened in Ann Arbor in 2015, including a new police chief was appointed and a new city administrator was appointed, and so this sort of hung in a balance for a while. But when those people were appointed, immediately we got to work and created an RFP looking for that consultant. You always wonder why things take so long, and it's been a long time. It has now been 3 years from the death of Laura Rosser. It's been 2 years since the completion of the report. However, an RFP was circulated. It was a good RFP. We worked really hard on it. We knew because of Linda Winkler, who is from our Human Rights Commission, we knew what was going on in the rest of the country. We knew who was working on what and who was doing the things that we thought we would like to have. And we made sure that those people were contacted and given a chance to respond to the RFP. So in December, we had a committee overseeing doing the interviews for respondents to the request for proposal. There were 6 legitimate respondents. There were actually 7, but 1 was too late, and you've got to be very careful about that. All the people who we thought were the best, who were doing the most interesting work across the country, all of them responded. We got very good RFPs. We interviewed them all. We talked about it, and believe it or not, and this was a surprise to me, and I think it says an awful lot for the process, we were unanimous. Police, community, city administration on who we chose. Doesn't mean they were perfect, and we've already seen they're not perfect. But it does mean we're doing the best we can to get this right. The group that we hired was Hillard Heighes, they are out of Chicago. They work nationally with the COPS project, which I should know what COPS stands for, but they're looking for ways for police and community to work well together, to cooperate, to partner in a way that is not unbearably time-consuming and effective and efficient. It's hard that it hasn't been done, and I have a feeling that whatever they're going to recommend is something that hasn't been done, but we will see. There will be a presentation, I just got final word, that there will be a presentation of their findings on Thursday, November 16th, at 7 p.m. at CTN, the Community Television Network. And this should be very interesting. It's an open meeting, right? And so people are invited. I can tell you that it is, that whatever Heighes comes up with is not going to dictate what Ann Arbor is going to do, but it will certainly inform it, and it might be adopted, or it might be adopted in some way. But it's certainly an important piece of what we're going to do to be somehow stellar and to somehow get police community relations, build that trust, enhance that trust. I think there's already some level of trust. We need trust that is more broad and trust that is deeper. When police trust us, we trust police, and maybe even, as you were saying, we build trust among each other, because trust is pretty shaky all over. And I think when trust is shaky all over, the stuff we saw in the video is all possible in Ronald. So that's what we're doing, and I think I'll leave it there.
Leslie, thank you. I was reaching for the mic, but I guess it is not operative right now. I really have follow-up questions for everybody, but I'm not going to do that except for one. And I want to ask Leslie. Leslie, and this may just be for my clarification, will the consultant be making recommendations on whether to have a police citizens advisory review board and other recommendations to enhance police community relations, or can you just maybe reiterate that?
My understanding is they're going to have recommendations for the police. They're going to have recommendations for what we do to form more community engagement, and some kind of a partnering or a oversight or a review or something. We don't know exactly what, but they will make recommendations about that as well.
Thank you, thank you. And let me now encourage. I think we have had 4 voices here. And again, we could I know they could, amongst themselves, could engage this dialogue. Mm-hmm. But we have a treasure of insight of all sorts in the room. So I'd like you to come forth with your questions, your observations, your comments, however you would like to do it. If it is specific to any given panelist, please do so. If it is more general, by way of a question or an observation. So we'll just do this by show of hands. We won't ask you to stand up. We don't have that in line needed right now. But why don't we just come forth now in whatever way any of you will. And thank you, Prosecutor Mackie. Good to see you. Thank you. If you will, and I'm sure from amongst law enforcement, many of you could be sitting on this very panel, so if there are things you'd like to say. But let us entertain some questions or observations right now, if you will. And if you would. Thank you, ma'am. And if you could identify yourself as you do so.
My name is Lori Ronald. I'm an attorney in Ann Arbor. I have a question for Police Chief Heighes.
Just call me Bob.
There's a university in Florida that tomorrow is hosting Richard Spencer, and they've spent over $500,000
Correct.
on security, which to me just seems absolutely outrageous when universities are already struggling to stay financially sound. And students are paying outrageous amounts of money for student loans. And everybody, all the science faculty are struggling just to get some kind of grants to keep something going. What does Eastern have in place to prevent that from happening? Say Richard Spencer shows up and says, you know, I want to have a talk over in your auditorium there. What has been discussed as far as avoiding spending these ridiculous amounts of money? You know, the thought that occurred to me, and I'm not a civil rights specialist by any means. I do civil appeals with contracts and divorces and stuff like that. So, you know, the things that popped into my head was, why aren't they talking about time, place, and manner? Why aren't they letting him speak out in the middle of the field somewhere with a fence around it? You know, because they can control the time, place, and manner. You know, spend $2,000 on something and put him over here instead of $500,000. You know, that everybody will be safe. They can still speak. Whoever wants to hear him pick up. I know that might be offensive, and I'm just kind of winging it off the top of my head. So please forgive me.
No, you're fine.
You know, what does Eastern have in place to address those?
Well, I think we follow what's going on across the country at the different universities very closely to see. We will respond if that opportunity comes to us. I know that Michigan State is facing the same challenge, has denied Mr. Spencer the opportunity to speak, but they're being challenged in court. I know that Ohio State has denied him the opportunity to speak, and he has challenged that in court. I know the University of Florida is allowing him to speak based upon the court ruling at the university, at Auburn University, where Auburn denied him the opportunity to speak, and the judge overturned that decision, and he was allowed to speak at Auburn. University of Florida did not want to take the challenge on as far as going into court, and decided that the best avenue was to be able to allow Mr. Spencer to speak, even though the university condemns what he has to say, but allow the speech to happen. If we faced the same challenge, we've discussed it, and we would probably allow Mr. Spencer to come on our campus and speak as well. But again, as I mentioned earlier, the challenges with that are about safety. Safety for the people attending the event and people who are protesting at the event. I'm not sure we have much control over the financial piece of it. You talk about putting somebody out in the middle of a field. I know there is...
I was just thinking of the G7 response in Portland years ago, when the protesters way over here, 2 miles away from where the action was, and that was considered just fine.
And I think we can do some of that in certain situations, but when you start putting the speakers out in the middle of nowhere, that becomes a challenge as well. And you see yourself in court, if I'm not mistaken.
You will.
And those type of events have happened at other universities where they place certain, like the abortion campaigns, they put them out away where people can't see them. Those were challenged in court, and they were required to put them in areas where main traffic flow, foot traffic, and that occurs on the campus. So I just sent 3 of my officers out to California, to Berkeley, because they were engaged in Free Speech Week, just to observe and try to bring back techniques, understanding of what we can do to be proactive, and our response if somebody like Mr. Spencer came to our campus, and if we had to deal with the safety aspects of that speaker being on our campus, because not only will it involve Eastern, it'll involve everybody in our county, all the agencies in this county. And it's a huge expense, but we just can't, and I think John can certainly agree with this, we just can't say no. And we're using, what they're using as a public safety exception. We don't expect that to hold up.
John, thank you, Chief. John, would you sort of go a little bit deeper?
Yeah, well, there's a, you know, I don't want to get too technical about it, but historically we have recognized certain parts of public property as places where free speech is protected. Sidewalks, streets, parks. universities that that designate that because they're universities, because they're institutions of higher learning, they invite people to come and speak on various topics, and if they're publicly funded universities, they're using public dollars, they're subject to the same First Amendment protections and constraints as governments are. So, Lori, it's funny that you raised that particular example because Delphia and I were talking to Dan Korobkin, who's one of the attorneys for the ACLU of Michigan, a couple of days ago in preparation for this panel. And I said, I got to tell you, I sympathize with local units of government, with universities, with law enforcement agencies that are understaffed. They don't have enough personnel oftentimes just to do the regular law enforcing that they need to do, and yet you have this event which requires an enormous amount, it would appear, of resources to be expended in order to effectuate the First Amendment. I don't have any easy answers, but putting the speaker out in the field surrounded by a fence, and I'm sure you were speaking somewhat figuratively, is simply not an option legally, and so we have to try to find some other options. I mean, Chief Heighes is right. If Eastern has that sort of event on its campus, I'm sure he's going to be reaching out to his brother and sister agencies and saying, "We need help. How can we do this in a collaborative way?" And it's difficult.
When we went to Berkeley, they had 1,000 police officers for their Free Speech Week. They're spending over $1 million. They spend over close to $1 million to provide for safety of everybody involved in that. That's a huge undertaking, a huge expense. And I appreciate your comment, because I would like to easily just say no, but that's really not an option on the table. Laura?
I'm sorry. Is there some way to instead spend $100,000 prepping everybody who attends Eastern and who works at Eastern ahead of time as to any kind of a training?
We have started a program, and John mentioned it briefly earlier. Free speech is such a hard thing to put in a box. You just can't. And what you consider free speech, somebody else might not. And so that's a challenge in itself. But we've started an educational program on the campus, both for our staff, our faculty, and our students, to try and educate them on what is free speech and what isn't, what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. So we encourage people, if they, a lot of times these people come to your campus just to get the attention, the media attention. And if you avoid that, if people stay away from that, but times are changing now. People want to be engaged. They want to be right there. They want to be right in the action, I guess, sort of to say. And so we, as law enforcement, have to, and universities have to recognize that. And those are challenging, because not everybody's open to communication. Not everybody wants to tell you what's going on and how they intend to protest an event on your campus. And so you have to prepare for all aspects. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of resources to do that.
Laurie, let Desmond,
I
please.
want to comment on that real fast. One thing that I've been really trying to push on my campus, because we have a lot of passionate people on our campus. I love it so much. It inspires me. I've been trying to help my students, my peers, learn creative ways to protest, because I'm all about nonviolence. I don't play violence at all. So I try to talk to them and figure out ways that we can creatively do things so we can get our point across. Like one time we had a meeting about it, and if someone were to have like a hate speech thing going on campus, we would have a complete and opposite thing happening at the same time. Exactly combating that hate with love.
The other unknown in this is people from outside the campus.
Absolutely.
Coming to campus,
Yes.
which we can't control, which we have no ability to enter a discussion with, because we just don't know. So the outside influences coming onto a campus are huge, and the concerns are huge.
Let me just add one other thing, and then we'll get to Mr. Hampton there. Some of you may have heard in the news this morning, and I believe it's on MLive as well, that on this Friday at its Board of Regents meeting, Eastern Michigan University will be considering some changes to its policies on student programs and requirements to address this. That is speakers. And just to give you, there's a sentence here that says at the end of the policy statement that's coming forth, accordingly, the university will promulgate reasonable rules and regulations surrounding the use of its campus facilities with the dual goal of protecting the First Amendment rights of members of the community and safety and security of persons paramount. Now, that's a broad rubric, and there's a lot that will be done in there, but we do know that this is on Eastern's radar screen, and as I say, that will be coming forth as a policy recommendation, I believe largely in response to the times that we have right now. But thank you, Attorney Londo. Mr. Hampton.
First of all, thank you all so much for coming and sharing this information with us. We appreciate it. I heard the term used earlier, experimentation in democracy, which I think is interesting. Not too many years ago, there was something called unlawful assembly, and people who looked like me were detained and or arrested while serving God in our churches, while working on our jobs, while having house parties, etc. If that's a real law, which I don't know whether it is or isn't, why was that law not applicable to Charlottesville?
It's hard to answer in a vacuum, William. If I knew which law you were talking about, I'd probably be anti-it.
It was known as unlawful assembly. And I
Unlawful
know of churches
assembly.
where people came in and
How long ago
said, you
was
guys, probably, well, a long time ago. But during your lifetime, John.
Okay, well, you know, I bet you that law doesn't exist anymore.
I don't think that law existed then. I think there was a mechanism to arrest people who look like me.
Which was my point. My point was when we let government control the messaging, when what's permissible, what isn't permissible, it tends not to control idiots like we see at Charlottesville. It tends to hurt protest groups generally, those who want to peacefully. They just happen not to be in the mainstream. They happen, in your case, you know, you happen not to be white. So we have to, the reason the Bill of Rights exists is to try to protect the powerless from the powerful. And if we start reacting against hate groups by trying to constrain the Bill of Rights, then what we're really doing is it's self-defeating. We're enhancing the power of the powerful, and we're lessening the protections for the powerless. That's not to say the powerful don't have free speech rights too. It's just they don't need them as much. I wouldn't like to see. I think there are unlawful assemblies. If people are getting together in the middle of the night with flaming torches and sheets and they're armed and they're marching through through neighborhoods to send a threat or to be intimidating or to incite violence, that's an unlawful assembly. I think everybody here would agree with that. But simply to prohibit people from assembling because the government doesn't like the particular message that they convey, that in and of itself should not be the test for what is or what is not a lawful or unlawful assembly.
In your opinion, was Charlottesville a lawful assembly?
I have problems with the nighttime stuff in Charlottesville more than I have with the daytime stuff in Charlottesville. I think law enforcement was totally overwhelmed. I think it was an under-resourced response. Maybe there was an underappreciation of just how volatile that situation was going to be. Personally, I have a problem with people at 11 o'clock at night marching around with flaming torches and guns. And I think that probably some of that, if I am a judge and I'm writing a time, place, and manner opinion, I'd probably find something in there. I don't want to speak for everybody in the ACLU, because, you know, we have a lot of diverse viewpoints on stuff like this within that organization as well, and some might say, no, John, I think you're wrong. I know they would agree that where mergers involve symbolic speech, I mean, some speech is simply symbolic, and it's as protected as what we say, you know, literally coming out of our mouths. Some speech, as I said earlier, is not really speech; it's behavior, and it's not intended to convey a message. It's intended to bludgeon people. It's intended to cow people. The hard part is it's easy to talk about it abstractly and understand the distinction. The hard part is drawing the distinction on the ground, whether you're a judge writing an opinion, or whether you're a cop, you know, trying to enforce a permit and determine when it's gone too far. In my experience, police officers would prefer not to be in the policy-making business. They want to know where the line is, so they know what line they can enforce. But in these circumstances, that line can be very fuzzy.
Yes.
You're fine.
So my kind of question is kind of touchy-feely, and maybe there's not a real answer to my question. And I'll start with the story before I leave with the answer. But then we'll leave with the question. I'm starting with the story before I give my question. In our office, we hire young students who, either volunteer or, are paid to help us, with their, kind of clerical work. And there's this young lady at the University of Michigan, and I just passed her by, and I asked her, African American young lady, I asked her, so how are you doing? How's your studies going? And not really expecting, oh, great, whatever. And her whole face changed, and she said, I'm really having a difficult time because of the activity and all the racial tension that are happening at the university. So my question is, because it really disturbed me and it really, has stayed with me, what can law enforcement do to make sure that we talk about the protected speech of those who are protesting or are using, hate speech. What can law enforcement or even the community do to make people who are the targets of this speech, make them feel comfortable and safe and feel like they're a part of this community and part of this country? No one, I know it's a big question, but I think that's a real challenge for us.
Okay, so that goes back to like when I did that event for the international students and Buff students I talked about earlier. You remember that?
Yes, we do.
Yes. I remember. Okay, so it's about taking that initiative to show love and comfort. So how police officers can do it, you guys do a wonderful job with community policing. I always see an officer on campus, and I always talk to them. On my way here, I had an officer help me out. I couldn't find Mr. Woods, and he helped me out. And also, I'm the president of Active Minds on campus. We're dedicated to raising awareness of mental illness and breaking the negative stigma and raising a seek help culture. And we have a lot of that on campus. We are always making sure that each other are taken care of and know their resources. So it's about making sure that we see each other where we are and not ignoring it. One thing that I've been pushing really, really hard is that the Black mental health on campus last year was at an all-time low. I hated seeing my Black people walking around with sad faces, tears in their eyes, with their head down, struggling in classes. I hated that. And I've been telling my Black people that all the time since then. And that's why I did the march specifically, so I can uplift them. I told them we're Black and excellent, but we're also Black and resilient. And that's a historical thing that we've been. And I think that takes us individuals. We need to recognize the pain in each other's feelings and stepping outside of ourselves to touch that person and say, you're not alone, and I got your back. And I think officers, you guys would have a wonderful impact if you did that more often.
So, just to kind of follow up on that, not to put law enforcement on the spot, but that's kind of what we do. But do you think that what kind of things are you doing in the community to, or are there mechanisms at your law enforcement agencies in which you could, allow communities to see that that you're not just, there to protect the speech, but you're also supporting people in your community.
Sir, I don't think anybody from the U is here right now, but we work with the University of Michigan obviously very closely. I think the two primary things that law enforcement can do is to make sure that these relationships exist ahead of an incident, and they're not something that we're trying to do on the tail end, to make sure that we're going into it, that the names are known and everybody knows the players and everybody knows the concerns of specific groups, because different groups have different concerns as it relates to law enforcement. The other thing that I think goes a long way is to show that when that line is crossed, when it's no longer a speech issue and now we're into the area where a crime has occurred, that we are actively pursuing it, investigating it, and taking all the necessary steps to make sure that everybody in the community knows that it's a priority to take those things forward.
Thank you. Chief, I don't know if the Chief, did you want to offer anything about
Sure,
how
I
we
will
respond?
just echo exactly what Jim has said, and Desmond, we certainly, I think communication is the key to all of this. Communication with all people, and I can only speak from the campus experience. Communication with all our students and our faculty and our staff. I mean, our law enforcement program is just one piece of the puzzle. We are not the entire community, but we want our community, when I say community, the campus community, to know that we're there, we support them. And we do everything that we can to solve some of these incidents that have happened on our campus. And like I said earlier, I take it to heart because I have grown up around Eastern, okay? I bleed green and white. And I love all our students. I love the faculty and the staff. I have great relationships with them. And I'm not an out front person. I'm more behind the scenes, a one-on-one type of individual. And those type of relationships, I see that as key to our success for building the future. These events on our campus were very traumatic. And I spent a lot of time with our students talking about how they felt, because I needed to understand how they felt so that we could do better in our response to our students on our campus and our staff and faculty. Without that communication, we don't know what's going on. We don't necessarily understand. One of the things we learned, social media is so powerful today, that if we aren't engaged on social media and if we're not aware of what's going on and able to correspond with our students, we got problems. We're going to be behind the 8 ball. We're not going to be proactive, as Jim said, out in front of it. We're going to be behind it. We're always going to be chasing it. And I think that's part of the learning curve that we're going through, is just understanding how powerful social media is and the need for us to be able to respond to those tweets and quirks or whatever that we have. Unfortunately, we have a president, I think at times it's over-tweeting and should stay off social media. But that's my personal opinion.
I want to come to Leslie for a minute, but as I do that, I also want to make sure that we give all of our law enforcement agencies an opportunity to come into this dialogue in whatever way you will. So if you want to just shoot your hand up, however it is, that would be good. But Leslie?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that the Michigan Department of Civil Rights about 7 years ago started what they called community response groups. And they were groups that were meant to reach out to communities when some kind of hate crime took place or some kind of an incident took place. It was, the sense of it was that it's not just law enforcement that is needed, it's also the community that has to heal, because the community has been hurt. When somebody is attacked, it's the whole community that is hurt a lot, not that person's community and the rest of us. We formed one in Ann Arbor in 2010, and it kind of went by the wayside because there wasn't that much hate going on. we're talking about reinvigorating it, because that kind of outreach is not just for universities. We all need it. I mean, because we're all not sure. Can I trust you? What do you think? I don't know. The times are pretty scary here, and I think everybody needs reassurance.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
To kind of add on to what you're saying, you're talking about how can law enforcement make people feel more welcome. And I think really the people in that setting themselves could do more to make people more welcome. And so I give a couple examples from my past. I went to school just up the road. I lived at Helen Newberry, and my dorm, or my cafeteria was Betsy Barber. And I remember this, it was 35 years ago, I remember it like yesterday. People would sit segregated in Betsy Barber cafeteria, and I'd be thinking, well, we should be like kind of getting to know each other or something, but I didn't really know what would be good or acceptable or what to do. And so, I mean, it just stayed like that. And I think I don't want to feel like, oh, we just want to make, law enforcement do this. Like, I don't know. I just felt like I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what. Or I used to live right on the boundary of Detroit, Alter Road area in Jefferson, and all my attended St. Ambrose Church. And it was right on the line there, and I'd be sitting there thinking, gee, I would just love to see more diverse people walk in the door. I wish they would. And like, it's not going to necessarily happen that I'm sitting there wishing it. So I think sometimes people want to make something happen, but they're not quite sure how. So hats off to you, Desmond, for reaching out in the community, and especially it just seems like you're trying to unite people. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, observations? Yes, ma'am, please.
I have a question. There's been talk, and I think all of us have heard about what's happening in Eastern and in Michigan, but I'm curious, what is it like in our communities, in Saline and Dixie Township, and is there this rise in hate groups and in hate crimes, and what's happening with that?
Right. Well, thank you. Those of you from Chief Todd here. Thank you.
I know of no rise in any hate groups out in Chelsea. We do have a Human Rights Commission. Actually, the bylaws are just, I think, approved 2 council meetings ago. There's a process. So, I mean, if a crime's committed and you come see me, if you think you've been treated improperly, we have a Human Rights Commission. They meet, I think, every other Wednesday, and then it's going to be once a month on Wednesday. It's kind of, they're in the infancy stage of this. You report that to them. They determine whether a violation occurred. It would go to our city attorney for the investigation and then outcome. But any town has incidents that take place. And I'll get you some generality of it, but we had an individual who was denied access to our library based on what they weren't wearing. And so that person came to the police department, myself and the investigators. I've got 34 years on, the investigators got about 46. And so we sat down with this person to listen where they were coming from. It was new to me, it was new to the other person in the department. And one of the things we're going to do in Chelsea is, if we don't know, we're going to try to figure it out, get to the bottom of it, and present it. So that was, things come up in all different jurisdictions that are new, and our job and obligation is to try to figure out if a crime was committed or not. And then in this case, it was more of not a crime, and it went to that Human Rights Commission, and they're taking a look at that. So as far as any big hate groups, we're not aware of it. We had some incidents where those rainbow flags were taken. We actually dropped everything we're doing, figured out who took the flags, and I can tell the outcome of that because the individual that was involved, there were some juveniles, and the person who was the victim chose not to move forward in any prosecution, which we don't accept that, even though probably would be a good idea, but they had their choice. So we take every crime serious, whether it's a $30 flag or something significant. But one thing I want to bring to the whole group is anything that happens in Chelsea, you think you're treated improperly, incorrectly, not treated with due respect, at any time you come see me. And we'll get to the bottom of one way or another and go from there. And if an officer, you think an officer didn't treat you with respect, dignity. You come see me. If we made a mistake, we will fix it, correct it, apologize, and move forward. And I think I could speak for all department heads as far as police in this room. I'm on the Southeast Chiefs Board, so Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, Washtenaw. One thing that's unique to this county, I think that's second to none, is the relationships and to working together with all the different departments. I can tell you, from Chelsea, with 13 people in a department, we can't get the job done without help of Ann Arbor, the sheriffs, Ypsilanti, state police, Saline, Pittsfield, Eastern, U of M. And we all have to work together for the commonality of, making this the best county to live and raise a family in.
Thank you. And we're going to take a question over here. And as I do that, Kathy, I want to thank you that you had left. He said, what's that about? Ms. Wyatt, as I think we all know, is the sort of right-hand person within the county sheriff's office. And Kathy, if there's anything that you would like to say about how the county goes about melding with the community to create the trust level that is often helpful before we get into a crisis. But let me just take our question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, one of the things, I'm Sheila Blakeney, I work with the Public Defender Office. One of the things that I've recently become really interested in are body cams, because we had a very interesting presentation recently. And I was just wondering how many departments do have officers that are now equipped with body cams, because I think I think there was a lot of hope that having in-car video cameras would pretty much capture the interaction between an officer and arrestee, but that's not necessarily the case. But I think body cams might have a chance to do that more effectively if they're used. So I was just wondering how many departments actually have and are using body cams now. I know the Sheriff's Department is, because that's who our presentation was from somebody in the Sheriff's Department. So
the city of Ypsilanti is on board with body cams. We've been using them for the part of about 18 months.
So only selected people use the body cams,
No,
or
our whole department.
Oh, the whole department. That's wonderful. What about the state police?
We're not yet. We're testing some different equipment, I know, and I'm not sure how far off until we get that. With us, it's the expense and management of the data has been an issue with how we do that and be able to share the information essentially quick enough. Right now with just the in-car video that we produce, that's it takes almost a full-time enlisted person to manage FOI requests and get the video to Lansing, redacted, then be released. So that's all a piece of it, along with the technology struggles. But I know we're studying it and looking to move in that direction. I can't give you a time.
How do I get some more black people in there?
I was going to ask Desmond how, real as far as those are the groups. We've been doing a lot of outreach, a lot of recruiting on college campuses, and trying to get those numbers up. But I think it's going to take more than just police. I've got a son that just decided to change his major to criminal justice, and I'm not going to tell him not to be a state trooper or not to be a police officer, but part of me is hoping that he changes his mind. I commend the guys that we're hiring now. Our posts, probably 40% of them at our posts now have been hired in the last 2 years. And for those kids that want to be police in this environment, it's tough. So it's going to take more than just us going out there and telling them it's a great career. We need all groups to talk about if you want to make a change, we need help from other groups to get those bodies interested and want to be a police officer.
Thank you. And we're just about to, just a few more minutes, and then we're going to bring Delphia and Prosecutor Mackie up. But to the county, and my apologies, our deputy sheriff is here, and so between the two of you, however you'd like to speak to the community trust building component of what's in office.
Just for clarity, this is Commander Marlene Radzik from the Sheriff's Office, and we were trying to compare notes right across Judge Simpson here. Because we
So
had,
he moved back.
He moved back. Because we had so many different possibilities that we can talk about in terms of the Sheriff's Office trying to build trust. And I do think that we're lucky here in Washtenaw County because we have so many law enforcement agencies that get it, that understand that you create a safer, better quality of life for your communities when you are a part of your community, not a part from them. And the Sheriff's Office, you know, we were just talking about something this past Saturday where there was a homicide in the MacArthur area, which is one of the communities where there's high rates of poverty and distrust. And because there was this homicide that occurred during the day, and a lot of families and even children saw it, and the schools which was impacted the schools. Washtenaw Intermediate School District, somebody from United Way, our interrupters, our outreach workers, community mental health, community public health, all these different groups came together, developed a resource sheet where people could get help, and went out through our community, through the MacArthur area communities, knocking on doors, passing out this literature. And it was really appreciated because as somebody here spoke to, it showed not only were the people who needed help, and there were a number who said, yes, I would like follow-up, but it said something that we, as the Sheriff's Office, try to say all the time, which is, we care about you, that we are here to serve you, and we care about what happens in your community, we care about you and what happens in your lives. And you know, I got numerous calls since or comments talking about how much it was appreciated. But it's not just those kinds of external things that we do that helps to build trust. I'm going to pass it to our commander here because one of the things she came up with that I think also speaks to what the Sheriff's Office and what law enforcement is doing and how it builds trust, which is the core team. Which means that and she can explain that, but it really talks about how internally we serve the community and develop those relationships.
So I'll try to make this short because I could probably talk about this for the rest of the time here because I'm so passionate about it. But you know, I was talking to Judge Simpson before this got started, and a lot of people look at law enforcement and they wonder why we don't do more. And you know, I've been here for 28 and a half years, so I've learned along the way, you know, what's that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So when I graduated from the police academy, I think we can all speak to the tools we had to do the job were on our gun belt. We had our taser, our gun, our ASR, our handcuffs. In looking at what's happening now in the community and getting more probably mature in my career, when I look at the majority of the calls for service that we go on are substance use disorder issues or mental health issues. And clearly we cannot arrest ourselves out of that epidemic. So anytime I have an opportunity to talk about, you know, law enforcement, I went to a Washtenaw Recovery Advocacy Project meeting and I was really hesitant because a lot of people in there were in recovery, and I thought, okay, do I go in there wearing my uniform or should I just dress down so it's not intimidating? And I thought, no, I represent law enforcement, and so I'm going to go there wearing my uniform and just showing the people that are in long-term recovery that, you know, we can't arrest ourselves out of this epidemic. We're here to help you. The root cause of some of these issues we're encountering is mental illness and substance use disorder. And so we have a team, unfortunately only 2 people now. We've partnered with a person from community mental health and a deputy sheriff. And they go out and we've had like social contacts, family members saying, you know, my son just dropped out of Grand Valley State. He's, you know, addicted to heroin. We've
get these people into, you know, different resources, people that, you know, get felony charges that end up in our correctional facility. You know, that's not a place to treat substance use disorder or mental illness, so they've been able to navigate, get them out of the correctional facility and into resources, which is what they need to make the community better. And we have had so many, you know, thank yous from, you know, just to see the progression of someone who is, you know, weighing 80 pounds and, you know, they look terrible and they're addicted to, you know, now they have a full-time job a year and a half later and they're healthy. And so I think that is also helping build, you know, trust within the community. But again, it's not just a law enforcement, police services issue. It takes a community to, you know, move initiatives like that forward. So again, I really thank you for everything you're doing. And, you know, it takes all of us.
Well, thank you, Commander Rasnick, and let us give our panel a
Just to close out, and I'm going to hear this at the Thanksgiving table, and probably for years to come. One of my jobs that Mr. Hiller gave me was that I should introduce my brother, and I forgot. The Honorable Judge Simpson. Thank you. Sorry. But I would like to thank everyone for coming out here today, and I think we learned a great deal. We learned a great deal about what's going on in our community to address the pressing issues today. But we also learned that there's a lot of work to do. We learned that there's a lot of things that each of us can do. And so those are, you know, I hope as we leave here that we all make a commitment to do something a little different, do something that makes all of us a little safer in the atmosphere that we're in today. But before we close, I would, Prosecutor Mackie is here, and he would like to say a few words.
You know, one thing that is striking to me, one way we could instantly improve police-community relations is if we had more police officers. If police officers weren't just running from call to call to call, not that they don't want to be out in the community, it's kind of hard to do. One of the things the commander said, listen to police radio, and I wish more people could do this, especially funders. 2 to 3 times per hour to listen to Ann Arbor Dispatch, the Sheriff's Department. It's about mentally ill subjects, people who are in crisis. I live in Ann Arbor. I work downtown because of our office, of course, and I call 911 rather frequently when somebody is running out in traffic, somebody's tearing off their clothes, somebody is in such great distress. They do a great job. If they can do something about it, they are there instantly. It's a bad way to provide service that we don't have more mental health treatment, but police are the front line of mental health treatment. And Professor Woods, also on the front line. He took over at the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, and I used to go to their meetings because it was such a mess. And we dealt with the aftermath. Between Mayor Heighes in Ann Arbor and Professor Woods, that was straightened out. People live in public housing for many reasons. Many of them are mentally ill, and everybody needs to be someplace. And under Professor Woods, with Mayor Heighes having appointed him, the treatment of the mentally ill was so much better. People were treated with dignity, they were argued with, their concerns were listened to and handled as best they possibly could be. I was glad to hear that that's a priority on campus now. I want to talk, Lloyd Powell couldn't be here today. And Lloyd, when he talked about starting this 20 years ago, 21 years ago, actually he talked about it earlier. It wasn't that he had anything against police. He really wanted to enhance relationship between police and community. He was a police officer for much of his career in the Army. He was a major in the Army, mostly military police. And he was then a police commissioner in Detroit. So he was genuine. He was good at everything except driving a car. He believed passionately in defense, which did not take away from his respect for police. We live in dangerous times. You know, I talked about we need more police officers. Well, if people in Washington get their way, we're going to have far fewer. I'm sure you've read that Betsy DeVos's brother owns Blackwater, or owned Blackwater, wants more contract police. That's going to catch on. Rich people will have protection, and poor people won't. You want law and order people, go to any public housing site. You want people who believe in drug enforcement, go to a public housing site. People call LawNet wanting help. We have our work cut out for us. I didn't get to see the video, but I think we all watch the news, and if we have any sanity, we're scared to death anew every day. But I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank all of you for coming. Let's get back together next year. Let's get more people here next year. Thank you.